Hi, I'm Gail Rubin. Stay tuned for today's episode of A Good Goodbye, Funeral Planning for Those Who Don't Plan to Die. Hi, I'm Gail Rubin, host and author of A Good Goodbye, Funeral Planning for Those Who Don't Plan to Die. Welcome to today's show, brought to you by the fine folks at French Funerals and Cremations. As the doyenne of death, check out the pearls, I'm all about getting the funeral planning conversation started. A doyenne is a woman who's considered senior in a group who knows a lot about a particular subject, and that would be me when it comes to the party no one wants to plan, a funeral or memorial service. By thinking about what you'd want in your funeral and having that conversation before there's a death or illness, you can reduce stress at a time of grief, minimize family conflict, save money, and create a meaningful, memorable good goodbye. That's what this program is all about. Just as talking about sex won't make you pregnant, talking about funerals won't make you dead. And your family will benefit from the conversation. So let's get this conversation started. Our special guest today to discuss what it's like to face your own impending death at some point, we never know, is Brother Arturo Olivas. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
So you are a Franciscan brother.
Yes, I am.
And you have lung cancer that you've had for a while. Tell me a little bit about your diagnosis and what you're facing.
I was diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer, advanced lung cancer, adenocarcinoma, on September 16th, 2011. And this was after a period of about 2 years when I was experiencing pain in my back, difficulty breathing, and a prolonged episode of what seemed to be bronchitis. And so after various trips to my primary care physician, urgent care, certain tests were taken, x-rays and so on, and it was determined that I had lung cancer.
Wow. And
so Friday evening, September 16th, I remember it so well because it was such a dramatic episode in my life. I was hospitalized and underwent various tests, MRIs, PET scans and so on, and it was confirmed that I had lung cancer.
Well, and I'm a breast cancer survivor myself, and nothing makes you more aware of your own mortality than a brush with something like cancer. Fortunately, mine was caught very early, and I'm cancer-free, so I am thankful for that. So what have you done since you got this diagnosis, and you have been undergoing a treatment with a new chemotherapy that's actually extended your life beyond the original prognosis you were given?
Absolutely. I was hospitalized for about a week, and during that time I underwent additional tests, and my treatment began at that point, which included, actually began with steroid treatment, then went on to radiation treatment, had a radiation brain surgery procedure, and then I was put on chemo, and I'm currently on that. And it's a special chemo treatment called targeted chemotherapy, and the drug that I'm taking is called Tarceva, and it's a recently new therapy for treating the kind of cancer that I have. Only 10% of the people with lung cancer respond well to this, and I've been blessed to be among those 10%. And so the chemo has been very effective in stopping the progression of the cancer. And so my initial survivor deadline, I suppose, was initially 8 to 12 months. And I've been living with the cancer for close to 18 months now.
Wow, wow. So how has this experience with this cancer affected your outlook on your own mortality?
It's given me opportunities to be a lot more busy than I expected. And what I mean by that is, since I was given such a short time to live, let's just say it the way it was presented to me. I've got 8 to 12 months to live. I didn't think I was going to be as busy as I have turned out to be.
What have you been busy doing?
Preparing for my death.
Excellent. We like people who prepare before there's something going on. So what have you been doing to prepare?
I've been living. And this is the thing that I like to add to that statement, because a lot of folks, when they hear me say that I'm preparing for my death, think that I have kind of immersed myself in a morbid attitude about my life. On the contrary, my disease has been a blessing in that it has allowed me to reflect more deeply and profoundly on the beauty of my life. It's allowed me to appreciate it in ways that I never thought were possible. And at the same time, it has allowed me or encouraged me to be very practical and prudent about my situation. And that means planning for my death.
Mm-hmm. A road we are all going to travel down at some point.
We are traveling on that road as we speak.
That's right, as when you're alive.
When you're alive, you're ultimately going someplace, and that's, you know, your ultimate demise. And so we are on that path, and there's no mistake about it.
Although you are a Franciscan brother.
Yes, sir.
And so your spirituality, your religion informs part of your outlook on our journey.
Absolutely, it does.
In this life and whatever comes after.
Exactly, and it's helped me, it's allowed me to, again, grow deeper into my own faith, my own spirituality, and to deal, you know, with the terminal cancer that I have. It's not curable, not yet at least. There are a lot of advances in medical science as we speak, and who knows, maybe within a year or two, there might be some new treatment that will extend even the treatment that's been successful for me now. But yes, my spirituality, my faith as a Roman Catholic Franciscan brother has allowed me to deal with this death sentence in a way that might have been difficult for somebody else who doesn't participate or doesn't assent or invest in the faith dimension that I have.
Well, you mentioned that the actual traditional iconography or artwork of St. Francis is not the birds and bunnies, but actually holding a skull.
Absolutely. I'm also a santero. I'm a painter of saints in the New Mexican tradition. So I've painted many images of St. Francis, who again is my patron. I'm a member of his order. And so in the course of learning how to paint and what to paint and how to paint it in the traditional way, I've learned that the traditional iconography of St. Francis is, as you say, not just the birds and the bunnies, but St. Francis holding a skull. And it surprises a lot of people because St. Francis is so popular, and the image of Francis with the birds and the bees is as popular as well, birds and bunnies, and bees, I suppose, why not? They're surprised that Francis was traditionally depicted holding the skull. And initially it turns them off, as skull imagery often does in many different contexts. But the skull represents Francis's meditation on the mortality of life. It's not meant to be morbid, it's not meant to be occult, it's not meant to be scary. But it's, in fact, an aspect of our Franciscan spirituality, where we see life as not an end in itself, though it will end in a physical way, no? But the skull represents our need to meditate on our life so that we can live it well with purpose and meaning.
Absolutely. Well, and we have our artwork on the set, many different depictions of skull imagery and skeleton imagery. But it's really to depict the eternal spirit, the skeleton that remains when the flesh is gone is like our eternal spirit that continues on when physically we are no longer present here in this sphere of being.
Absolutely. You know, the skull imagery, like what you have embroidered on your beautiful blouse and what you've presented here, these Dia de Muertos artifacts, skull imagery crosses all cultures at all times and all traditions. You know, when the body is no longer present, what often remains are the bones, the skulls. And so in this tradition, Dia de Muertos, skull imagery, skeletal imagery is very prominent. And again, in our Franciscan tradition, Again, we depict St. Francis with the skull, but also in various countries and at various times, Franciscan brothers, monks, nuns, and sisters were often buried in what are called ossuaries. These were places where the bones of the deceased religious person were placed in a collective. And so you had skull and bone images, often carved, you know, in stone or wood or whatever, to mark that particular final resting place for the physical body. And so oftentimes people react to skull and skeletal imagery with great apprehension. They may bring personal, religious, or cultural, or even political meanings to that imagery that aren't, say, as positive as you and I find them to be. And Dia de Muertos certainly is populated with skull and skeletal imagery, and that's a natural thing, since it is a celebration both of life through death and life. And so we see a positive aspect to that imagery.
And you were also involved at the National Hispanic Cultural Center in setting up Dia de los Muertos ofrendas, the altar where you would pull together imagery and various items that help us remember people that we love. But with the lung cancer connection, I understand you did a very creative ofrenda related to celebrities.
Yes, you asked me earlier, you know, what have I been doing to prepare for my death? And, you know, I respond, first and foremost, I've been living. And one of the things that I have been living about is my art. I have been a member of the Spanish Colonial Art Society for 15 years. I've participated in the annual Spanish Market, which is at the end of every July in the summer, where santeros and santeras come together to sell their art. But also for about 10 years, I've been involved at the National Hispanic Culture Center, creating ofrendas with a number of artists, with Christopher Gibson, Catalina Delgado Trunk, constructing ofrendas, which are the memorial tables that are very typical of Dia de Muertos. And this past November, November 12th, I was invited by the education staff at the Hispanic Culture Center to create an ofrenda on any topic, but I decided I really wanted to use my lung cancer situation to raise awareness of the prevalence of lung cancer and its gravity, and to do so in a way that would appeal to our society's attention. And so I focused on a number of celebrities who've died of lung cancer. And so I created a traditional ofrenda using their imagery, but also drawing John Wayne, George Harrison.
George Harrison, yeah.
Exactly.
And
to
others,
name,
yeah.
Exactly.
And the thing about an ofrenda is you don't have to be Hispanic, you don't have to be Catholic. Every year from Halloween to November 1st and 2nd, those are the Dias de los Muertos, the Day of the Dead, I pull together pictures of people from my family who have died, elements of food and drink that they liked, toys for pets who have passed on. So those are the kind of things that you would pull together for an ofrenda, and it's a wonderful opportunity to remember those that we love and really to bring their spirits back to our own consciousness.
Exactly. And death is universal. Everybody, every living thing experiences it. And every culture has its own way to deal with it. In some cultures in society, the way to deal with it is to avoid it or to deny it. And I think in our contemporary American culture, influenced by one tradition or another, there may be a tendency to keep death at bay. And this may be one reason why people are not planning to die. Right. But in the Hispanic, the Mexican tradition of Dia de Muertos, death is acknowledged for what it is. It's a part of life, almost to the extent that death is embraced, but not in a more morbid way. In our Franciscan tradition, we refer to death as sister death. We don't worship or venerate a anthropomorphized figure, sister death, but we use sister death as a symbol of that reality of death that leads us to eternal life. And so in the tradition of Dia de Muertos, the skeletal imagery representing death is welcomed into the home. And it's made comfortable to us. It's a way that we find some resolution with the tragedy of death. with the grief and sorrow that's associated with death. And it's often done in a fun way.
Yeah, very often dressing up, painting your face like the skeleton face, and having parades, marigolds, flowers. So many wonderful, fun things are associated with the celebration.
Exactly.
Right there during those days.
And in the Mexican tradition, which of course has been brought to the United States, has become very popular, especially here in Albuquerque, where we have the annual Marigold Parade, which you referenced. Children are exposed to the reality of death at a very early age.
And that's so important. So many people feel like I need to shield my child from this, but it raises more questions for the child than it answers.
Exactly, and I think it's a very healthy thing to do, to expose children to the reality of death. Again, not in a morbid way, not in an occult way, but to express to the children that it is a part of life, and at some point in their lives, they may experience loss at an early age, either of a family member, a friend, or somebody, or even of a peer. And so exposing them to this reality is important. It lets them know that this is a part of life, and there are ways to deal with it, to help buffer, the impact of sorrow and grief, and perhaps the tragedy of an early death.
So tell me a little bit about how you've been preparing just on the practical level.
Well, the first thing was preparing documents that would allow me to feel secure about leaving this world in a very prudent and responsible way. 2 years before my diagnosis, I actually had prepared a testament and will. In fact, I remember the date very specifically. It was September 13th, 2009, almost 2 years to the day when I was diagnosed. So when I was diagnosed, I actually had something in place. And again, this is the prudence of advanced planning. When I received that diagnosis, I went into a state of shock, and I had friends and family who helped me address these practical ways of preparing for my death, because I took my doctor at his word that I would probably die within 8 to 12 months, if not earlier. Since my tumors had metastasized to my brain, a brain tumor diagnosis was even more grave. It was closer to 4 months of average death or survivorship, and so I worked with that pre-existing document, and so I expanded it. I created a advanced health directive, a living will. I arranged documents that included durable power of attorney for both finance management and for healthcare management. And so those were some of the practical things that I put into place. But there were some other things too that were less legal, but just as important, that related both to my way of dealing with an imminent death, other than the practical legal aspect of it, and that reflected more my spirituality and my psychology. How was I going to deal with this reality, which at that time seemed very imminent.
And in terms of what you want done with your body, burial in a plot that is that here in Albuquerque, New Mexico, or back in California where your parents are?
That's one of the things that I did. I was aware that my father had purchased a plot in Rancho Palos Verdes in California, and that for some time he was not sure if he wanted to be buried in that plot or in the National Cemetery in Riverside, which is set aside for veterans. So I helped him come to a final decision. I said, Dad, listen, I'll buy your plot, and that way, you can follow up with your desire to be buried in Riverside. And so recently, actually late in December of 2012, I went to California to finalize the purchase of that plot. And so I've got my little piece of real estate overlooking the harbor in Rancho Palos Verdes, California.
Very nice.
Yes.
Very nice. And have you actually pre-planned with a funeral home in terms
that
of
I have not done, and the reason for that is because after doing some research, I discovered that one must be particularly prudent in that, because if you pre-plan or prepay, you have to make sure that that company is going to be in business.
Well, what most funeral homes will do now is what you're prepaying is an insurance policy that pays the funeral home to carry out your wishes. So if, in fact, that company does go out of business or is bought up by another company, your insurance policy to pay for those arrangements stays in place still. So
well, there you go.
there you go. And by the way, you know, one of the things I do as the doyen of death is to go accompany people to help them make their final arrangements. You know, the saying is you can't pay somebody to do your push-ups for you, but you can hire a personal trainer to make sure you do your push-ups.
Well, there you go. Well, so I'm glad I got this information because the other thing I've had to do, considering the fact that I have exceeded my expiration date, I've had to make some adjustments to the plans that I've made already. And so I will definitely look into that pre-planning for the actual burial service itself.
Yeah.
But within my Franciscan tradition, we are often buried in our habit, which is the traditional tunic, the long brown tunic that you usually see.
With the white cord?
With the white cord, exactly.
Nice.
So I've left directions for that. And because we try to live a simple life, I've made arrangements to have a very simple pine coffin made for myself. And so upon my demise, I will be placed in a simple pine coffin wearing my very fashionable brown tunic with the white cord and then placed in the earth.
Okay. Now, would you have an event here in New Mexico before being shipped off to California for burial?
That's all part of the plan.
Okay.
I've left instructions that my principal religious observances will be held in California, where most of my immediate family are. So I will have a rosary and a mass in California. And afterwards, there will be memorial services for me here in Albuquerque, a rosary and a mass. And I'm making provision for masses to be said for eternity.
Right.
We can do that, you know.
Yeah. Well, and since you create artwork, it seems to me it would be nice to have your artwork on display maybe at one of those events, maybe not the religious event. This is the party planner and me coming out. You know?
Well, I'm glad you're mentioning it because I had not thought of that about that before.
It's a wonderful way to help personalize the proceedings, to make it all about, you know, you.
Well, it is all about the individual, isn't it?
Yeah.
Obviously, because that's the focus of coming together, to remember and to celebrate the individual. And I like your suggestion of a personal item, a memorial, that helps friends, family come together and perhaps focus on something that was very important to the individual who passed away. And my art has been very close to me, both in terms of an expression of who I am as a creative person, as a New Mexican, as a Hispanic, as a Franciscan. So thank you for that suggestion.
Sure, sure. Can you explain a little bit about your medallion?
Yes. As I mentioned, I'm a Franciscan brother. I'm a member of the Third Order. I'm the servant minister of the local secular Franciscan community here in Albuquerque. And since Vatican II, 1962 to 1965, the habit or the religious garb of Franciscans in the secular order changed. Formerly, we used to wear a scapular or a cord, and even before that, the full habit that you see St. Francis always wearing. And that was changed to this medallion.
And it's hands that are crossed, and it looks like there are little crosses in the hands indicating the stigmata?
You are very observant. You get 2 points for that. This is called the Tau Conformity. And the Tau is both the Greek and the Hebrew name for one of the letters in the alphabet, but it's also an ancient form of the cross. And when St. Francis went to the Holy Land to evangelize, but also to negotiate with leaders of the Islamic community there, he came upon a pre-existing order of brothers who were serving lepers and the poor in Jerusalem. They wore a black robe, a black habit, with this tau emblazoned upon it. He was so impressed with the work that they were doing that he decided to make it his own personal signature. So over time, the tau, this ancient form of the cross, became the symbol for the Franciscan order. And what we see here are the arms of Christ and the arm of Francis overlaid. And the arm of Francis is indicated by the long sleeve, and the arm of Christ is just a bare arm, but they both have the stigmata.
Oh, interesting.
Proper estate planning enables you to pass your possessions and your assets to the people and organizations that you care about. By planning with a living trust, you could avoid the high cost of probate and minimize taxation. The attorneys at Morris Hall have been helping thousands of clients pass their assets as they intended. To schedule your free consultation, call us at 505-889-0100 or visit us at morristrust.com.
A Good Goodbye, Funeral Planning for Those Who Don't Plan to Die is a light touch on a serious subject. The book has everything you need to know before you go. A Good Goodbye helps you reduce stress and family conflict, save money, and create a meaningful, memorable good goodbye. It's available in paperback and all ebook formats through online retailers and at agoodgoodbye.com. Start a conversation today.
Why are we talking about this at the dinner table? Just put my ashes in a coffee can or something. Please pass the salt, dear.
Can I help you, ma'am?
Yeah. Which can would you recommend putting my mom's ashes in?
I think I heard ashes.
I'm sorry, my mom's cremated remains.
That sounds the same.
My mom didn't even like coffee. She drank tea.
You can't avoid your funeral. Pre-plan and take the burden off someone else.
Hi, I'm Gail Rubin, host and author of A Good Goodbye, Funeral Planning for Those Who Don't Plan to Die, and creator of The Newly Dead Game. The Newly Dead Game is like the classic TV show The Newlywed Game, but the questions test how well you know someone else's last wishes. It's a fun way to get the funeral planning conversation started. For more information about The Newly Dead Game, visit agoodgoodbye.com.